"Leave your keys on the desk," my son-in-law said. Weed restoration is moving beyond founder habits. He had brought a security supervisor and a cardboard box to the office I had used for 20 years. My daughter stood beside the window, holding a termination letter with both hands. They spoke about their company as if I were an aging employee who had overstayed his usefulness. I could have stopped the meeting with one phone call. Instead, I asked why 3 active safety reports were missing from the letter's handover list. My name is Thomas Reed. I was 64 that winter, and I had started Reed Restoration exactly 20 years earlier after a burst pipe destroyed half a neighborhood clinic. My daughter, Anna, was 36 and served as company president. Her husband, Derek Sloan, was chief operating officer. I remained a 42% owner and worked 3 days a week as senior estimator. They knew about my shares. They had forgotten what those shares required them to respect. I did not want the company back. That mattered. 4 years earlier, I moved out of daily management after a minor heart procedure and promoted Anna. She had grown up around damaged roofs and drying equipment, then earned a business degree and worked elsewhere before joining Reed. Derek came from a national construction group. He brought useful systems, stronger scheduling, and a confidence that impressed our lenders. I wanted them to build something larger than the company I knew. The first Reed office was my garage. I owned 2 industrial dryers, one used van, and a red toolbox that had belonged to my brother. Our first year produced less than $200,000 in revenue. By year 5, we had 14 employees and contracts with 3 local property managers. Growth came slowly because I refused jobs we could not staff safely. Customers sometimes disliked hearing no, but nobody was served by a crew arriving exhausted and unprepared. My late wife, June, handled invoices at the kitchen table and noticed every promise I forgot. She died 7 years before the firing. Anna inherited her precision and my stubbornness. For a long time, those traits balanced each other. When Anna introduced digital job tracking, our missed appointments dropped. When she negotiated a training partnership with a technical college, we found reliable apprentices. I was proud enough to step aside, and foolish enough to believe family trust could replace written clarity. June had warned me about that weakness before she became ill. She said I documented customer responsibilities in careful detail, but treated family agreements as if love made memory reliable. When Anna first joined Reed, June insisted she report to another manager and receive written reviews. After June died, I relaxed those boundaries. I invited Anna into owner meetings without defining when she spoke as an executive and when she spoke as my daughter. The confusion felt warm until a serious disagreement required colder lines. The ownership agreement was clear even if our conversations were not. Anna held 38%, Derek held 10%, and 2 longtime managers shared the remaining 10%. Major borrowing, a sale of core equipment, or a workforce reduction above 15 positions required board approval. Ordinary hiring and firing belonged to management. That meant Anna could end my employee role. It did not mean she could remove me as an owner or erase the safety duties attached to the board. Trouble began with speed. A winter storm damaged hundreds of homes across the county, and Reed received more calls than it could accept. Derek proposed using temporary crews supplied by a broker. I supported the idea if every worker completed our safety orientation and worked under an experienced lead. Derek said the storm would pass before paperwork caught up. He wanted crews deployed within 48 hours. The largest customer was a property group responsible for 6 apartment communities. Frozen pipes had displaced more than 80 families, and every delay kept people in hotels. Derek was not chasing numbers without human stakes. He spent 2 nights coordinating heat, access, and emergency storage. That dedication made his shortcut more dangerous because he could describe every skipped step as service. Good motives did not tell us when pressure had pushed the system beyond its safeguards. Our safety director, Carmen Ruiz, developed a shorter orientation that could be completed in 6 hours. It covered electrical hazards, contaminated water, respirators, and incident reporting. Derek approved it in writing. 2 weeks later, Carmen discovered that 1 temporary crew had been sent directly to a flooded basement after watching only a 40-minute online video. No one was injured, but a live circuit was found near standing water. The experienced lead stopped that basement job within 7 minutes. His name was Owen Price, and he had worked for Reed since our 4th year. He found the circuit because the water line on the wall looked wrong, and he refused to trust a disconnected breaker label. Owen later told Carmen the temporary workers had been eager and attentive. They simply did not know our stop-work sequence. The near miss was not evidence that they were careless. It was evidence that we had sent them without shared rules. Carmen filed the first report. Derek called it a paperwork variance and told her to correct the vendor. The second report involved a temporary worker using the wrong respirator during demolition. The third showed that a crew lead had logged 12 consecutive hours at 2 different locations. Each report described a risk that had been caught before causing harm. Together, they show the accelerated system was not working as approved. I read the reports because Carmen copied the board safety committee. I asked Derek to pause new temporary deployments for 1 day and verify training records. He replied that I was bypassing Anna and interfering with operations. I reminded him that the board had created the 6-hour requirement. He said founder habits were turning every correctable mistake into a crisis. Anna called me that evening. She sounded tired rather than angry. Reed had accepted nearly $3 million in storm work, and delays could cost customers their homes and the company its reputation. She asked me to let Derek manage the surge. I said I would not direct crews, but missing safety records belonged to the board. She heard the distinction as distrust. The next morning, Derek announced a reorganization. Estimating would move under operations, and all senior estimators would work 5 days a week during the surge. He knew my medical schedule limited me to 3. Anna offered me an unpaid founder emeritus title instead. I declined because the title carried no defined work and no access to project information. I told them I would continue my existing schedule until we had a proper transition plan. 2 other senior estimators accepted the 5-day schedule with overtime. I could not honestly call the requirement a device aimed only at me. Yet Derek had drafted the reorganization after I raised the reports and scheduled no accommodation discussion. An independent human resources manager later described the timing as poor and the process as unnecessarily abrupt. The decision could be legitimate while the way they carried it out still revealed contempt. That refusal became their stated reason for termination. The letter described inflexibility, resistance to reporting lines, and repeated interference with executive decisions. It offered 12 weeks of severance if I returned company property and agreed not to contact employees about active operations. I did not sign. I placed my keys on the desk because they controlled the office, then wrote the numbers of the 3 safety reports on the empty handover page. Anna asked why I was making the moment harder. I told her the firing was not the hardest part. The missing reports were. Derek said the reports had been closed after corrective emails to the vendor. I asked where the completed training records were stored. He said Carmen could provide them. Carmen's name did not appear anywhere on the handover list. The security supervisor looked uncomfortable. I took my coat and the red toolbox. The cardboard box stayed empty because most objects in that office belonged to the company. In the parking lot, I called our independent board chair, Helen Moore. I disclosed the termination and requested a special meeting limited to safety oversight, access to required records, and the effect of my employment separation on committee work. Before leaving, I walked past the wall where our first large insurance certificate had been framed. Derek had replaced it with a digital performance screen showing jobs opened, crews assigned, and average response time. The screen was useful. It also displayed nothing about training clearance or unresolved reports. I took a photograph, not as evidence of wrongdoing, but as a reminder that people manage what a system makes visible. Our new system had made speed impossible to ignore and safety easy to summarize away. I did not ask Helen to reinstate me. I asked her to preserve the vendor files before systems changed. She contacted outside counsel and the company's insurer, not because a lawsuit had begun, but because document handling and safety reporting required independent review. The board scheduled a meeting for Friday. Until then, management remained in charge, and temporary deployment continued only for crews with verified training. At home, the silence felt larger than I expected. Reed restoration had occupied half my adult life. I knew leaving daily management would be difficult, but I had imagined a planned retirement dinner, not a security escort. I almost called Anna as her father. Then I remembered she had acted as president. Mixing those conversations had helped create the problem. I sent one message saying I loved her and would keep company matters inside the review. My first impulse was less disciplined. I drafted a message to the original employees describing what had happened and reminding them who had founded Reed. Reading it back, I heard a man recruiting loyalty for a family fight. I deleted it. Those employees did not owe me a rebellion, and contacting them during active storm work could undermine the same company I claimed to protect. The board process was slower and emotionally unsatisfying. That was exactly why it was safer. Carmen called Helen, not me. She provided the original reports in a spreadsheet showing 17 temporary workers with incomplete orientation records. 5 had later completed training. 8 were waiting for assignments. 4 had already worked on sites. The spreadsheet did not prove an injury or intentional concealment. It proved that the board-approved control had not been consistently followed. Derek responded with a performance summary showing the storm operation had completed 87 jobs in 30 weeks. Customer complaints were low. He argued that the temporary system was effective, and that my objections reflected discomfort with scale. Those results deserved attention. So did the fact that good outcomes had depended partly on hazards being caught by people, whose warnings he minimized. Friday's meeting took place in the conference room where June once served sandwiches during our earliest planning sessions. Anna sat at the head. Derek sat beside her. Helen began by stating that my termination as an employee remained a management decision unless it breached an agreement. The board would not use ownership to supervise ordinary personnel disputes. I agreed. Derek relaxed too soon. The 2 longtime manager owners attended as directors. Priya Nair led finance and Owen led field operations. Both had known me for more than 15 years, but neither spoke in my defense before seeing the records. I had asked for that restraint. Priya said personal history could explain our reactions but could not replace the agenda. Owen added that field crews needed a decision they could follow on Monday, not a verdict about which family member deserves sympathy. Helen then listed the separate questions. Were safety controls approved by the board followed? Were reports closed with evidence? Did the severance request improperly restrict communication about oversight matters? Had management given the safety committee accurate information? Each question concerned the company, not my wounded pride. Anna looked at the handover page and finally understood why I had written the report numbers there. Carmen presented the records. She explained that the broker had interpreted orientation scheduled as permission to deploy workers. Derek's team had noticed the wording but continued because experienced leads were present. The experienced leads had not been told they were responsible for completing the missing modules. Responsibility existed everywhere in theory and nowhere in practice. Derek said no one had been harmed. Carmen replied that prevention was the reason the reports existed before an injury. She did not accuse him of wanting unsafe work. She said the process rewarded speed without assigning one person authority to stop deployment. Anna asked why she had not received the spreadsheet. Carmen said it had been attached to the weekly safety packet, which operations summarized for her. The summary described all 3 reports as vendor paperwork issues resolved. It did not state that 4 people had already worked without completing the approved orientation. Derek said he wrote the summary based on the information available that morning. The file history showed Carmen's spreadsheet had arrived the previous afternoon. He had not opened it before sending the summary. That detail changed the room. It was not proof of a planned deception. It was evidence that Derek had reported certainty without reviewing the record. Anna asked him why he had not waited. He said the storm demanded decisions and that every hour mattered. I understood that pressure. 20 years earlier, I'd made similar choices with fewer systems. The difference was that I had asked people to stop me when speed became blindness. Helen proposed immediate corrective steps. The broker would receive a written deployment rule. Carmen would control training clearance independently of operations for the rest of the surge. All active temporary workers would be rechecked within 24 hours. The board would receive unedited safety reports for 3 months. No one argued. Owen volunteered to call each experienced lead and explain the new authority. He refused to send only an email because crews needed to hear that stopping a job would not damage their performance reviews. Priya opened a separate cost code for training delays so managers would not hide those hours inside job overruns. The corrective plan changed incentives, authority, and information together. That made it more credible than a speech about doing better. Then Anna raised my termination. She said the reorganization had been planned before the reports, and that my refusal of a 5-day schedule was genuine. I confirmed both facts. My employment could reasonably end even if management had mishandled safety information. I asked only that the severance language be revised, so it did not restrict lawful communication with the board or safety personnel. Helen said counsel would review it. Derek stared at me. So, you are not asking for your job back? You fired an employee, I said. You did not fire the responsibility of an owner. He asked whether I planned to remove him. I said that decision belonged to the board after the review. I would vote on evidence and disclose the family conflict. I had not spent 20 years building a company where one angry founder could decide a person's fate in a single room. For 2 days, the corrective work appeared successful. Every active crew completed verification, and the broker assigned a dedicated training coordinator. Then the insurer's review found a deeper problem. Operations had tied a manager's storm bonus partly to the number of jobs opened within 48 hours. Safety clearance did not appear in the formula. Derek had not created the bonus to encourage shortcuts, but the incentive pushed in exactly that direction. Anna had approved the bonus plan. That fact prevented her from placing the entire failure on her husband. At the next meeting, she admitted she had reviewed the cost and schedule measures, but not asked what behavior they might reward. She suspended her own storm bonus and proposed adding verified training and incident closure to future measures. The board accepted the change. Derek's consequence was more serious. He received a final warning, lost operational authority over safety clearance, and returned his storm bonus. The board required outside leadership coaching and a 6-month review. One director wanted immediate termination. Carmen opposed it. She said the company needed accountability that repaired the system, not a dramatic sacrifice that let everyone else flee innocent. My own consequence was separation. I did not return as senior estimator. After council revised the agreement, I accepted severance for the employee role and kept my board seat until the annual meeting. I moved the red toolbox into my garage where it had started. For the first time in 20 years, Monday morning arrived without a Reed job on my calendar. I spent that morning repairing a broken latch in the toolbox and found June's handwriting beneath the top tray. Years earlier, she had written 3 unpaid invoice numbers there so I would see them every day. I have forgotten the note, but remembered the argument. She believed important warnings belonged where decision-makers could not avoid them. Carmen had done the modern version of the same thing. The failure was not that the warning was unclear. It was that leaders had built a habit of looking past it. Anna came to my house the following Saturday. She apologized for allowing security to attend a meeting that had presented no safety risk. She said she had wanted the termination to look decisive because employees were watching. I told her decisiveness performed for an audience usually became cruelty. Then I apologized for leaving ownership boundaries vague and assuming family loyalty would cover them. She asked whether I still believed she should lead the company. I said yes if she learned from the review and allowed the board to measure that learning. One mistake did not erase her successful work. Refusing accountability would. She asked whether I could say the same about Derek. I said the same standard had to apply, though trust would rebuild at different speeds. The storm surge ended 6 weeks later. Reed completed 143 jobs. 2 customers complained about scheduling, but none reported a safety injury involving the temporary crews. That outcome was fortunate and earned partly by the correction. It did not transform the earlier gaps into harmless paperwork. The financial result was less impressive than Derek's first forecast. Training pauses and hotel extensions reduced the storm margin by nearly 9%. Priya presented the number without treating it as failure. Reed remained profitable. Customers returned to their homes, and the company learned what responsible surge capacity actually cost. Future bids would include that cost instead of assuming safety time could be borrowed from workers and repaid later. At the annual meeting, I chose not to stand for another full board term. I accepted a 1-year advisory seat limited to history, estimating standards, and ownership transition. Carmen joined the board safety committee as a non-voting expert. Anna remained president. Derek remained chief operating officer under the review plan. The structure was less comfortable than family trust and far more honest. 6 months later, an apprentice named Malik showed me the new deployment screen. A job could not open until training clearance displayed in green. The system also named the person authorized to stop work. Derek had sponsored the change and credited Carmen's reports in the rollout meeting. That did not restore every damaged relationship, but it was measurable behavior, which mattered more than a polished apology. Malik asked whether I had designed the original system. I told him there had barely been a system when I began. We used paper folders, handwritten equipment tags, and too much memory. He looked surprised that the founder admitted any weakness in the early company. I said nostalgia often edits out the risks that later procedures were created to prevent. Reed had not betrayed its history by becoming more formal. It betrayed that history only when formal tools were used to hide what people needed to see. Anna and I began having dinner once a month with one rule. Company matters stayed out of the first hour. At first, we struggled to fill the space. Then she told me about a pottery class, and I told her I had started repairing the old van. We had spent so long being founder and successor that father and daughter needed an introduction. One evening, she asked whether the company still felt like mine. I said ownership and belonging were different. I still owned shares. The company belonged in another sense to every person responsible for what it did next. Starting at 20 years ago gave me history and obligations. It did not give me permanent control over every decision. Anna said she had once believed succession required proving she could overrule me. Now she understood that leadership was not a contest against the founder. It was a commitment to make decisions that could survive review after both of us left the room. I told her that was the first sentence about Reed I had heard from her that sounded entirely like her own. They had fired me from the company they called theirs, and management had the authority to end my job. What they could not end was the truth recorded in the reports or the governance attached to ownership. I did not protect Reed by taking back my office. I protected it by making sure no title, including founder, could become more important than the warnings someone was brave enough to write down.